It's got a couple different sections. The first section has got this little lifter talking to the guy. And then it goes on and morphs in, and then they actually show you a nice diagram on how the hydraulics work and everything, so bear with it. I thought about jumping forward, but I said, nah, we'll play the whole thing.
This new drug-free toenail fungus treatment is destroying the foot care market. Want to know how to get rid of your toe?
You will in a minute. The intake valve opens before the piston reaches the top of the exhaust stroke, right? And the exhaust valve doesn't close until after the piston starts down on the intake stroke. All right then. Those valve timing specifications show that there is a valve overlap, a period of time when both valves are partly open, but maximum performance above idle speed. Said another way, valve overlap occurs when both valve tappets for one cylinder are on the cam's quieting rams. One valve is being gradually lifted, the other is being gradually closed.
Yeah, and during that valve overlap, the air-fuel mixture in the chamber is going to be affected. The mixture coming in is going to be mixed in with some of the exhaust gases which haven't gotten out yet. When the mixture is not quite right, what happens to engine idle? It's going to be rough. How can it idle smoothly without the proper mixture?
Yes, sir. And that can happen easily when mechanical tappets are used. Now, it's a different story when hydraulic tappets get into the act. That's because with hydraulic tappets, you can use camshafts with shorter quieting rams. This means that the valves will have less overlap. In fact, an engine with hydraulic tappets may have a valve overlap of only 30 degrees. A mechanical tappet engine may have a valve overlap of 60 degrees. Cutting overlap that much gives you a far smoother engine idle.
I'm beginning to see where hydraulic tappets do have an advantage. But I'm still wondering how they add more life to engine valve.
No need to wonder, my boy. Just add up the facts. Hydraulic tappets use shorter quieting ramps. That permits the valves to open and close faster. As a result, there's a much clearer path for hot exhaust gases to get out. That blowtorch effect you sometimes get with slower opening ramps is avoided.
Right, Beck. The hot exhaust gases don't keep rushing through a small area opening, so there's very little chance of burning the seat and valve face.
Now I get it. Hydraulic tappets make faster valve action possible.
Sure. Remember that with hydraulic tappets, you don't have to worry about an adjustment factor holding the valves open. The clearance between tappet and valve stem is automatically taken up by the tappet. It's constantly adjusted each time the valve opens and closes. You could even say that the hydraulic tappet is an automatic, self-adjusting link in the valve train.
Attaboy, Jack. That self-adjusting feature sure is a big advantage. As an example, even half knows that compared with an inline six, the valves, rocker arms, and push rods in V8 overhead valve engines make a longer valve train.
Oh, that I know. But what's it got to do with tappets?
Half. Use your noodle. When any engine gets hot, there's a lot of expansion in the block and valve train.
Sure, Hap. There may be as much as 30 thousandths expansion to adjust for. Mechanical tappets couldn't satisfactorily handle that much change in clearance. On the other hand, hydraulic tappets compensate for that expansion automatically.
Ah, now that begins to add up. I didn't realize they could take up that much of a change.
They do a good job of it too, Hap. And it's easy to understand when you know just how they work. I've taken one tappet apart so we could cover the operation in detail. Here you are. All the parts of the spring-loaded flat check valve tappet. Let's brush up on the part names and see exactly how they work. Now first, there's the tappet body. Inside it goes a plunger spring. Then the valve retainer. Next, the check valve spring and the flat check valve. Finally, the plunger and the cap. A spring clip holds these parts securely in the body.
Golly, not so many parts at that.
No, it's really quite a simple unit. And it's easy to follow how it operates. Look at this for a second. See this slanted hole in the oil feed groove in the tappet body? That's where oil enters the tappet. This groove lines up with a passage from the oil gallery. Now, opposite that hole in the body is an undercut in the plunger. It forms a chamber or annulus completely around the plunger.
A hole in that undercut part lets oil enter inside the plunger, forming a reservoir.
Yeah, Hap. From that reservoir, oil is admitted to the lower part of the tappet between the body and plunger by means of the flat check valve. The chamber in the lower part of the body is called pressure chamber because when the cam lifts the tappet body, it puts that oil under pressure. The body and plunger then are raised as a unit.
Speaking of plungers, somebody better turn this record before the needle plunges down the hole.
Now you know why hydraulic tappets are used. And talk about how oil flows within the tappet.
Okay, Jack, go right ahead.
Fine. We'll start with the reservoir. That's inside the plunger, remember? And it's filled with oil from the oil gallery. Now, that oil in the reservoir, due to pressure of the incoming oil, forces the check valve off its seat. It then enters the pressure chamber below the plunger to fill any void caused when the plunger's spring pushed the plunger up. As the camshaft turns, the cam lobe comes up against the bottom of the tappet body and pushes it up. The oil trapped in the pressure chamber by the closing of the check valve is incompressible. So any force applied to the body is transferred to the push rod directly through the trapped oil and the plunger. The trapped oil, in effect, acts very much like a solid piece of metal. Now, after the nose of the cam has passed under the tappet body, the valve spring closes the valve and forces the push rod down. The plunger and tappet body also return to the at-rest position.
Oil in the pressure chamber can bleed out in only one way. It is a controlled oil bleed upward between the body and plunger. Follow that?
Oh, kind of like a metered oil bleed.
Now you're talking. An oil that bleeds from the pressure chamber in that way returns to the reservoir in the plunger.
That calibrated bleed tap is the big key to tappet operation. That bleed is mainly how the plunger automatically adjusts itself to compensate for changes in the length of the valve train.
I get you. You mean the variations due to expansion of the block, push rod, and valve stem that affect tappet clearance?
That's the idea. If a lot of expansion takes place, say during high-speed driving, valve spring pressure will force the plunger deeper into the tappet body, always maintaining zero clearance and yet not holding the valve open. On the other hand, as the engine cools down and the valve train contracts, the plunger spring maintains zero clearance by keeping the plunger against the push rod. In the meantime, oil feeds in from the reservoir to fill the void in the pressure chamber. So the pressure chamber is always filled with the right amount of oil as determined by the plunger position.
In short, that explains the self-adjusting feature.
Yeah, Hap, that means there's always contact between all the mating parts of the valve train. That's what the term zero lash means. No clearance in the valve train. That plunger spring keeps the plunger up against the push rod when the valve body is not being raised by the cam. In addition, the check valve spring keeps the check valve closed until reservoir pressure overcomes spring pressure in order to let more oil into the pressure chamber.
Good going, Jack. That's a neat explanation of tappet operation.
Yeah, man. It sure clears up a lot of funny notions I used to have.
Now, how about explaining some occasional cases of tappet noise that time more apt to happen than any others?
Good suggestion, Tex. I've got some examples in mind. For instance, you may hear a tap of noise when the engine is started after the car has been standing idle. Actually, a little noise from starting is normal. We shouldn't try to correct it by replacing a tappet. That condition is due to a normal leak down of oil. This happens when the tappet stops in its raised position and remains under steady pressure from the valve spring trying to close the open valve. That type of noise will go away shortly after the engine starts running and oil is again pumped up inside the tappet.
But what if the noise doesn't go away?
Well, that's something else again. If the noise remains, there might be excessive clearance between the plunger and body, resulting in too much leak down. In a case like this, you can fill the tappet by quickly pressing the valve spring down. That will cause the pressure chamber to take in an extra supply of oil from the reservoir. That should make the noise go away. But if the tappet has excessive leakage, the noise will come back. Try filling the tappet 3 or 4 times. If the noise comes back each time, replace the tappet.
Okay, that clears up that type of starting noise.
Try this 6-second method tonight to reverse type 2 diabetes. Most people continue to take blood sugar.
Good. Now let's consider a running tappet noise. Say you run into a condition where the tappet clatters after high-speed driving. Suspect number 1 on your list should be air in the oil.
You mean foaming?
Right. too low an oil level will also cause air bubbles to be trapped in the oil. The oil pump will gulp in air along with the oil.
Yeah, and those air bubbles in the oil will be carried into the tappets. You know why that's bad?
Well, why? Maybe you better tell me.
Simple, my boy. Air bubbles are compressible. Oil isn't. Oil with air in it acts like a spring instead of a solid piece of metal. In other words, the tappet can't maintain zero currents because the plunger isn't held solidly against the push rod.
Oh, I get it now.
Ordinarily, the air will bleed out and the tappet will become quiet. But this could take as long as 20 minutes. However, instead of a faulty tappet causing noise, it's the air getting into the system. That's what you've got to correct.
Gosh, no wonder the tappet gets blamed for noise. An air leak could be an easy thing to miss.
That's just it. Too many mechanics overlook that and replace tappets unnecessarily. Don't you do that, or we'll be replacing you.
Tech's got a right to beef about that, Hap. However, there are times when you may have to replace a tappet. Like one with a stuck plunger, for example. You know, of course, that dirt is the greatest enemy of hydraulic tappets. It can make the plunger stick and bluey. No more hydraulic action. If an owner fails to change oil when he should, it becomes contaminated by the usual carbon and other products of combustion.
That's why the oil filter should be changed every 5,000 miles. If it isn't, dirt will get a chance to foul up the tappets.
Right. So if you run into a noisy tappet that you know is not caused by air or excessive leak down, then chances are the plunger's stuck.
Any quick way to check that?
Well, there sure is. If the plunger is stuck, you'll find you can rotate the rocker arm slightly on its shaft when the engine is not running. And when it is running, there'll be a lot of clearance between rocker arm and valve stems. That's because there's no pressure on the push rod when the valve is closed.
Yeah, and in a case like that, play it safe and replace the tappet.
I see. Then getting it out and cleaning it wouldn't do much good.
Well, you run a risk when you remove a tappet for cleaning. You may or may not do a good cleaning job. But the only way you really know is when you reinstall the tappet and get the engine running again. By then, you've used up a lot of time and labor. Now, wouldn't you turn blue if you had to do that work all over again to install a new tappet?
And you bet I would. And the customer, wow, he turned purple when he got the bill. Yeah, I sure see why it's better to replace a tappet when we know the plunger's stuck. In fact, I feel better about the whole subject of hydraulic tappets.
You should, my boy. Jack's done a swell job of clearing up some of the main points on hydraulic tappet service. And to help you remember, here's a reference book. It's got extra information you'll find handy when working on hydraulic tappets.
Swell, Tech. I sure can use that book.
Fine. We sure can use mechanics who are up to date on service know-how. It's another way to keep our service customers satisfied, which means better things for all of us.
That help with understanding, I hope? So as the valve changes, that it compensates for it too. Hot, cold, so ultimately it's a great invention. However, when they go wrong, they go real wrong. So I got a couple of examples I found. Two light homing cans. This one's got a round lobe on it. This one's got a deformed lobe. And I'm not sure if these were part of it, but here's one that, and I'll lift it and go with it too. I'll put this video up there, and I got, there's another video I have for, Lycoming IO 360, a guy is overhauling it. It's about 45 minutes long, but I'm not gonna play that, you guys can look at it on your own. There's a bunch of Lycoming stuff on the videos. Those engine parts are right out here out of Honolulu. There's things that are flying around here. So what I'll do today, I'll bring out the bleed down checker, and I'll bring out the spring tester. You guys can check all your spring. There's no place to put the spring thing in there, but it's good to understand how that works. Okay, I think that's about it for today. What I got, and on Tuesday I'll have, we'll talk about some bearings and color reduction, a little bit of color reduction, and that's it for construction. Alrighty, we got an hour before lunch.
Yay, measuring.
See you in the shop.